Welcome, my spuddies. Welcome to another episode of the Q&A. Today I've got a bunch of topics for you guys, from you guys. If you've got any questions of your own, or you think of some as we go through today's video, feel free to leave them in the comments below. That's where I pick all the questions from these videos. And I guess without further ado, let's jump in. Now, one thing that happened last week was I talked a little bit about Ogden Stonehealer, the member of the Brotherhood of the Dragon that we meet in Season 3, and inexplicably didn't know where the Master of Peace was going with the egg. And I pointed out that was kind of weird, right? Like, Ogden was incentivized to give us that information, and how could it be that someone who worked so closely with Glint would have had no idea about Tyria, while also at the same time seeming to make it look like he knew everything that was really going on, and we just weren't meant to know more yet. But the main response I got to this, actually, was people were questioning whether he's a member of the Brotherhood of the Dragon, which is crazy to me. I think what actually happened is people thought about Ogden back in Guild Wars 1, where, of course, we knew him more, and they didn't remember any comments about that from him there. Some of you guys even then went to the Guild Wars 1 wiki and tried to verify it from there too, and didn't find that information, so maybe WP's wrong. Well, no, actually, this is Guild Wars 2 lore, guys, and what happens with the wikis is, unless it's explicitly in Guild Wars 1, they will not talk about the new story that comes in Guild Wars 2 on the original wiki. The most that they'll do is have a link to the second games wiki where the relevant information then is. And yeah, it's pretty clear there in Guild Wars 2 in Season 2, when you meet Ogden, he straight up says to you, voice acted and everything, hey, yeah, I was a member of the Brotherhood of the Dragon. I guess the suggestion is that after the events of Guild Wars 1, sometime between the two games, that's when he joined. If you are one of those people that thought, hold on, Ogden's a member of the Brotherhood of the Dragon, that might be a sign it's time to replay Season 2, because honestly, that's really clear information. A lot of people missed it seems, even though it's right there. So there might be some other cool little details you're forgetting about as well. And it's like I was talking about in that previous video, if you do play it all in bulk, you'll see these weird odds and ends and places that the story might not seeming to be lining up properly. All right, here we go. So the first new question is from Zalarian, who says, hey WP, do you think it's likely for there to be other Elder Dragons we don't know about yet? Or after Steve or whoever we kill last, will ArenaNet do anything they can to distance themselves from the dragons? I get this question a lot, so I'm going to be very brief about this, but I definitely think that it's going to be the second of the two scenarios you propose there. There is, make no mistake, space in the lore for there to be more Elder Dragons. A little bit, but the space that there is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking the more explicit they are to us about magic and about the spectrum of magic and about what we may have seen in that vision of the eternal alchemy way back again in Season 2. You know, this vision of Tyria surrounded by 6 different orbs, 6 spectrums of magic, 6 realms, 6 Elder Dragons, 6 whatever you want, okay? When you have stuff like that in there, the idea that there's other orbs, and maybe they're smaller orbs, or maybe they're really big orbs, we just don't know about them, or whatever, or there's like a reverse side to everything, and there's even more. Those things can be written in, but I don't think that the devs will want to do that, and I don't think it's a good place to take the franchise in either. It's kind of one of those anime power creep things, right? Oh, you've killed these Elder Dragons, and now here's loads more, and you just add and you keep creeping the power up and up and up and up. I really think the best place for Guild Wars to go is to move away from this Elder Dragon storyline as quick as possible, to establish that, yeah, there are just these 6 dragons. Maybe we'll befriend them, we'll find our solution, whatever that ends up being. Maybe we'll kill a couple more, maybe some of them will start fighting one another. But once that's done, it's done. And I think we'll see the franchise go in a totally new direction. And that direction, I think, should be about the peoples of Tyria and their struggles with one another, and villains that are perhaps a little bit more nuanced than Elder Dragons themselves, and that's when the story can start taking us maybe completely into these deeper regions of Cantha or these broader places on the world map. I don't want to see more Elder Dragons. I appreciate there's a little bit of space, but I think that the devs probably don't want to see more Elder Dragons too. Curious what you guys think. Next one's from Once Upon a Cookie, who says, do you think we'll eventually get more interaction with the human gods? So he just had a question on the Elder Dragons. Why not slip one in there of the other side of the coin, the human gods? Being that they were so prominent in Guild Wars 1, I'd seriously love at least a fractal dealing with those mysterious entities again. Well, actually, I'm not so sure. I've been very explicit about this. They once offered us a fractal on the human gods, and I denied it because I just didn't think that a fractal would do it justice. And while I would say their storytelling, especially like in raids, is way better now, their capabilities, I still wouldn't want to see it in like a fractal, because fractals you end up doing loads of, and then they get boring and they get mundane, and I don't want to be in a situation where I'm seeing Balthazar every day and I'm bored by him and it's exciting or specific. You know, the one cool thing about the personal story not being repeatable is that even as bad as the Zaitan fight is, at least when you're doing it, you kind of know it's a special moment because it's not a regular part of your weekly gameplay. I don't want to see big lore moments become weekly gameplay. I think that's a bad idea. So for raids and for fractals, there's kind of some points against it. All that said, I think probably one of the most exciting things ArenaNet could possibly announce, especially for like selling their future expansions and stuff, is, okay, the Fissure of Woe is back as a raid, or hey, the Underworld is back as a raid, or any of the other 4 realms. That would be incredible. I would just say try and keep the actual story about the gods themselves on the more minimal side, which is really sort of what we had in Guild Wars 1 too. I think that the mystery of the gods and their function in this universe is really, really, really important, and it adds a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue, a lot of that super exciting stuff. Like when people start talking about Guild Wars lore and they really start getting into it, the gods are one of those topics that comes up all the time. They're really important for this franchise's lore, and so the idea that they'll come back into Guild Wars 2, I think they have to be handled really carefully. I don't want to see them lose all their mystery, really. I think that the franchise loses a lot of its luster in terms of those deep stories if they bring the gods back and they handle them poorly. So you got to be careful about it. Like one of my favorite moments of the personal story again is right towards the end, where you get that little bit more interaction with Grenth. That was really cool, and I just want to see little moments, maybe. Eventually, would I like answers to these big stories? I would, but they need satisfying conclusions and replacements to keep, you know, those higher level cogs turning. Hopefully, if that all has been explained well enough. So yeah, I think they have to be very careful. But I would love to see the gods come back. One of my favourite things about this entire story when it comes to the gods is how they are so minimal in Guild Wars 2. But when you really look quite closely at the impact they had on the world compared with how short a period of time they were really there, it's amazing. It makes them seem so powerful and awesome. So yeah. But moving on, Effin Nugget says the dragon that seems to be most forgotten was Rot Scale. Not technically a question, but it was a comment that sort of prompted me. I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. So yeah, in the last Q&A, we were talking about the sort of minor dragons, the regular dragons, people like Kunavang that lived out in Cantha, and the egg that hatches in Nightfall as well. Well, one thing I totally did forget, were the bone dragons associated with Kryta. So what is this? If you guys don't know, in Guild Wars 1, the Krytans, we'll set the stage for the start of the story. The Krytans have the Scepter of Ore, and there's a man who's an undying lich that can control the undead named Vizier Kilbron, who wants the Scepter of Ore. And so he storms Kryta with his armies of undead. Where did he get his undead from? Ore. So they're all these skeletons and zombies and ghouls and things attacking Kryta, but they are Orion. So in Guild Wars 1, when you kill these undead in Kryta, they drop like decayed ore emblems and stuff, and that was the idea, that these armies of undead had come from there. And accompanying many of these undead at Vizier Kilbron's side were undead dragons. These actually were the first dragons ever in the story. I think the first ones you ever meet, if you do everything truly chronologically, is in probably the Sanctum K mission. If you're going mission to mission to mission, there's like a couple of bone dragons that appear in a swamp, and they're really dangerous. They would use this skill called choking gas that would interrupt the hell out of you all the time. Really annoying. But yeah, so there's a suggestion that Ore had dragons too, and then they died, and then Vizier Kilbron resurrected them, and then they sort of went through. Well, of all of these regular bone dragons, of which we can only really speculate about their lore, there was also another one, a big daddy, a huge guy called Rot Scale. And if you went off the beaten path, you could actually meet him very early in Kryta 2. He guarded the entrance to this mausoleum. He was one of the earliest enemies to drop a unique green in the game, and he was really, really, really deadly. Very, very high level. Rot Scale actually is a dragon that does have a little bit more story. Is it tying him to the Elder Dragons? No. But what happened was, in the Guild Wars 1 alphas and betas, way back when, there was a quest chain where you essentially chased Rotscale. I never played this, but you chased Rotscale across the Shiver Peaks, or there's like a suggestion he moved from Ascalon over or something, and there was a bit more story from those old beta quest chains. And then when the game eventually released, he was where he is at the mausoleum, and that's about it. He really didn't get any more story. I don't think that you can put him on par with Glint and Kunavang. I think he's just sort of this cool little thing, and I do remember before Guild Wars 2 came out, I speculated that maybe Rotscale was going to be a champion of Zaitan or something, but that never really came to pass. The true origins of the Bone Dragons, what they were like in life, all that kind of stuff, I don't know whether the devs will ever go back to, but yeah, that's another example of some regular dragons, which I forgot about, so there you go. Moving on, we have another question sort of associated with the dragons. There's a lot of that today. From Ancient Rights, who says, "Hey WP, we have always seen that dragon minions cannot be corrupted by other dragons. And the recent story confirmation about the spectrum of magic explains why. But now that we see dragons absorbing other spectrums of magic, do you think we will see continued manipulation of the Sylvari by other dragons? While the Morgemoth magic might be diluted in the remaining Elder Dragons, the Elder Dragons themselves are more powerful. Is this something to look for, or do you think the devs want to keep a nice bow on the Sylvari no longer being dangerous because Morgemoth is dead?" I love this question. I never realised that there was space for this, and you're totally right. There is space for this. What an excellent idea if you're on board with this Sylvari, oh, are they good, are they bad concept. You're totally right, actually, that if that Morgemoth magic and his capabilities is now being diluted among the others, that should mean Primordus, Jormag, Kralgatoric, Steve, these guys do have some pull. And think about this as well. When they're all dead except just 2 remaining, half of Morgemoth's in one, half of Morgemoth's in the other, right? Like that spectrum, if you will, unless other things have started to siphon it. And yeah, they should be able to have a little bit of power over the Sylvari, surely? That's really crazy. I like it a lot. And especially if they want to continue talking about this spectrum of mind really being very important. That also, by the way, could be explaining why Casimir's getting a bit better at detecting lies and stuff. Maybe it's not just going to the Elder Dragons, but everywhere. That's very, very cool. Now, would we want to see, even though there's room for it, it's a bit like what we were talking about earlier, even though there's room for it, would we want to see this? Personally, I think not in any major way. I think maybe you can have a random Sylvari every now and then, like Erin, who's losing their mind or whatever. But I somehow think a lot of the community as well won't take too kindly to the idea that the Sylvari have even more super special spotlight focus on them again for even longer. I have always been a big fan of just do different expansions that have more heavily involve different races each time. So this was like the Sylvari based expansion. Maybe the next one's more Asura based because we've got a lot of Primordus, for example, or maybe it's more Norn based because Jormag is active. Now that they've got 2 active, and I suspect they'll probably make even more active very soon, I actually think maybe that idea in general could be dead. But we definitely had a lot of people not liking the idea of the Sylvari being these special snowflakes all the time, and this would sort of push it further that way. So maybe I wouldn't do it, but I love the concept. I think it's very cool, and maybe in small doses, that's something fun they can play with, yeah. Moving on, Veggie Plays says, "Hey WP, thinking about future elite specializations. I was wondering if there's a chance of ArenaNet creating custom weapon types. Basically, elite-only weapons, halberds, lances, great axes, whips. This would be an interesting way to be more creative with the specs themselves, while also allowing to implement some lore of the classes, say through legendary collections. What do you think of this idea?" Okay, there's a lot I have to say about this. Number one, just because an elite specialization gets a new custom weapon, I don't necessarily think it gives them more opportunity to tell lore. There's ample opportunity already to give lore about these elite specializations. They just don't have the systems in the game to deliver it to us well enough, which totally sucks, and I hope it's something that they're paying attention to for the next expansion when we get a bunch more. But there's also some other things here that I'd like to point out. Custom weapon types, you've rattled off quite a few cool ones there, and I think though halberds and lances are pretty similar, let's be real, you've hit all the major ones that people tend to talk about. Talk about some kind of big spear thing, a great axe, a whip. I think that when you look at Guild Wars 2 as a franchise for the next 5, 6, 7 years, or lots and lots of expansions, it's actually going to get really hard to invent totally new weapons. I really do think it is. I mean, take the challenge, guys. Give me as many really interesting new weapon that you can. And because that's quite the ordeal, I think what you'll find is if they ever do this, and there's totally room for it, and it would help them sell expansions, definitely, we'll probably find those same weapons get copied across a lot. So if they had a spear, if they make the underwater weapons, for example, above land weapons, you'll probably see like trident goes on all the casters, and spear goes on all the heavies, and spear gun or harpoon gun, I should say, goes on all the mediums all at once. Like, they have to dilute like that. And then you might be wondering, well, we've got an elite specialization that uses the same weapon, and you kind of realize something, that in Guild Wars 2 it doesn't actually matter whether they do custom weapons or not. Now, I like the flavor of it and I want to see it, don't get me wrong, even though those new weapons would have less skins available and blah 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 blah. I want to see it, but really the devs aren't limited to make interesting skills just by implementing new weapons, right? Like a dagger on an elementalist already gives you a whip style effect. So, and when you've got something like a hammer that is a ranged weapon, just because, hey, magic, lol, which is what they did with the Revenant, do we really, really, really need the custom weapons? I don't know so much. So I think when we do, and I do think we will eventually get these, they're going to be pretty slow about it. They're going to be very slow because they don't need it. It's just sort of a thing to sell the expansions, really. And they've got enough space with the existing weapons that are there. I'm not poo-pooing the idea. I'm not saying I hate it and I'm encouraging them not to do it, blah, blah, blah. I just think, you know, it's one of these very heavily requested things, but if you really think about it, it's not super, super, super needed. All right, and so the final question for today comes from Jennifer Marrett, who, again, asks me a question I get quite frequently, and I wanted to dive into just a little bit. She says, what is generating all the magic in the world? If the dragons are meant to consume it to create balance, what is the actual source? So this question's coming up a lot because it sort of seems like the logical question we should be asking to solve the whole problem of what do we do, right? Like, maybe instead of killing the elder dragons, we just have to deal with whatever's creating too much magic. And I think the franchise will go into answering this question a little bit more. But there is an interpretation out there that we should think about, and I think it's been known to the Asura at least for a very long time. The devs pulled quite a cool little trick in some of the early personal story, where when Professor Gore is first theorizing that dragons eat magic, he goes and he gives his seminar or whatever on the idea that the dragons are eating magic, and everyone boos him off the stage. And the Asura do this because they say, you cannot create or destroy magic. It's stupid to say that elder dragons are eating magic because it is a closed system. It does not magic out of nowhere. It does not go anywhere. It is a closed system. You cannot destroy it. And what the clever trick is that both Gore is right and that audience that boos him is right. It probably is still, in my opinion, a closed system. The elder dragons don't consume it, they just hold it within themselves, like sponge holds water, which we later got explained to us in the living world. And then when they fall asleep or die, it leaks back out. And that's sort of always been the interpretation, that there is just a normal amount of magic, and the elder dragons need to just basically recollect what has leaked out of them while they're asleep. But the devs have been doing something a little bit more interesting recently, especially when you look at some of the latest current events, where they seem to suggest actually that magic comes from life, and there's some kind of connection here. This is a pretty common fantasy trope as well, you probably recognize from some other franchises. And then that kind of muddies the water. So this is one of those things I've got my eyes on, that I'm looking to see what the devs say. And I think it's sort of one of those perfect questions we should be mulling over. I don't think you can have a surefire answer just yet, though. All right, there you go, guys. Lots of lore today, basically. Just one question about some mechanical-based stuff. If you've got any questions for next week, please feel free to leave them down below. I'm planning on doing a super Q&A as well for people on Patreon very soon, so check that out too. And until next time, guys, hope you have a wonderful evening. I'll catch you next time. This year's gone. Starting Patreon, if you guys weren't around back then, it was absolutely insane. It was a move that